Hello, my patient and understanding loyal fans. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Frets. Again, I apologize for the wait, but grad school just took precedence. But right now, I'll be finishing my first year tomorrow, and I actually have an abundance of time in this finals week, which is surprising. So here we are with a new episode featuring my man, Dr. Shawn Purcell. Shawn is an amazing guitarist and educator and writer. He plays currently with the Navy Commodores, and he was previously with the U.S. Airmen of Note back in the early 2000s. He also teaches guitar and arranging at George Mason University, where his lovely wife, Darden, is the head of jazz studies. So I met Shawn a few years back online, as is typical with a lot of these cats, which I'm certainly grateful for. And we've just been in touch and, exchanged messages, and I ended up getting him an opportunity to come to Ohio and get him some gigs and clinics in the Columbus area. I wasn't able to see him actually perform, unfortunately, but we have met at the Gen Conference a number of times. I really respect and admire Shawn's playing. It's super lyrical and chock full of language and lines, and it's just ridiculous. He's so good. And he's just a really humble guy, too. He's been through a lot of really interesting musical experiences. He grew up with a musical family. His dad was a professional trumpet player, and Shawn actually spent time traveling with, I think, Cirque du Soleil in the 90s, some circus gig. And then he found his way into the military scene and then went on to get his doctorate, all sorts of stuff. So he's really run the gamut of everything you could possibly do as a professional working guitarist and educator. So I'm sure you're going to dig this conversation. We talk about arranging as a guitarist, his perspective on that, and also his thoughts on, what he suggests his upperclassmen guitarists do as far as grad school or taking time off. He's got some great advice on that. And we also go into his tenure as a military musician and what that kind of means and the logistics of that. Before we get to this great conversation, I just want to thank all of you for supporting the podcast still. And now that school is over for the year, I have a lot more time and energy that I will be devoting to the podcast in the summer. I've got plenty of backlogged episodes to get out, tons of interviews. I have Frank Potenza and Taylor Roberts, Brandon Coleman, Tim Lurch, bunch of folks, and I'll be doing more interviews, of course, during the summer. So be on the lookout for that. You can always find updates at beyondthefrets.com, or my Instagram is probably the most active, at beyondthefrets. I want to thank the Mid-American Center for Contemporary Music for supporting this podcast, as well as Silver Heart Productions for supporting the podcast, and all of you great, loyal listeners. If you could please rate, like, subscribe, share, do whatever you can to get the podcast out there. I would really appreciate it, because I think these conversations are just really fabulous. And not because of anything that I'm doing, but just because of the great guests that are on and their willingness to be open and honest about this crazy music business as a guitarist, educator, composer, etc., etc. So without further ado, sit down, grab an axe, and get abducted. Welcome to Beyond the Frets. Shawn!
Hey, Zach.
Hey, man.
How you doing, man? Good. How you doing?
Jinx.
Yeah.
Things are good, man.
Yeah, so you're at Bowling Green. Did you, this is just like your second semester you're going into?
Yep, starting on Monday.
How are you liking it?
I love it, man. It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's really great.
That's cool. So who do you study with there?
Ariel Kasler.
Oh, okay.
He's from Israel. He went to Berkeley back in the day.
Oh, wow. That's cool. So, did Chris then, did he retire or did he just...
Yeah, he retired. He'd been there well over 30 years.
Yeah, I've heard about Chris for years and years and years and years, so...
Yeah, he's just one of those, ubiquitous jazz guitar educator people, you know.
Cool, man. So, I mean, obviously the scene is not happening right now, but was there much of a scene when you first arrived, or were we already kind of in the shutdown mode?
Well, I got there. Well, I moved here in August. So
Okay, so we were already.
yeah, I mean, well, actually, it's all in person. Um, the program's small enough where I mean, my classes are like 4 people, so
Sure.
it's pretty easy to do it safely and
That's awesome.
great.
Yeah, we went in person. It was like lessons were in person for like 12 weeks.
Okay.
We didn't, knock on wood, have any issues really.
Yeah.
And then classes, whatever could be online, they moved to online, but ensembles ran like half and half. So if it was a 2-day a week ensemble, they'd do 1 day a week in person and then 1 day a week through Zoom. So
Gotcha.
it's kind of hybrid-ish. I think I might have 10 students this semester, so
Oh, nice.
it's good.
That's a strong studio. What's your studio usually like? We're recording, by the way. I mean, so we're in
Oh,
it.
okay. Oh, okay. All right, cool. So usually it's been about 8 to 12.
Okay.
I was at 9, and then we had 2 students that are starting in the spring, which is kind of unusual
Oh wow.
to have folks start in the mid-year. And then I'm hoping, knock on wood, that I'm going to have 2 or 3 new ones coming in the fall.
Okay.
So we could be pushing 13 or 14
Wow.
starting next year, which is great.
Yeah. Very strong.
I mean, you know how it is that starts to get a little bit to the point where it's becomes difficult to manage.
Sure.
But I have a great studio of guys, and I have some guys that are like new to the instrument or new to jazz really on the instrument,
Yeah.
and then a couple of guys that are just killing it. Where I'm like, whoa, slow down because you're going to be like playing me under the table like in about
Right.
2 semesters. But it's a great mix, and all the cats are really nice, and it seems I never know how they treat each other when I'm not around because it's like the old guy's not around, but
Right.
they seem pretty supportive and pretty cool with each other, and you know, not now getting together to play as much, but
Sure.
before the pandemic, really trying to get together and kind of have that community, which is great.
Yeah, I always was a little envious because, like, when I went to my undergrad, there, like there was like a really strong group of guitarists that were like 4 to 6 years older than me. So like they were finishing school or like maybe had just left, and I knew that they were like really tight and like really had like a vibe and a community in the guitar studio. But then when I got there, I was literally the only like jazz guitar major to graduate in like 4 years by the end. So like
Oh wow.
kind of
Okay.
just me most of the time. So I definitely missed having that kind of camaraderie. But
Yeah, you were at Capitol?
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we again, thanks for the gig hooking us up in
Oh, for
Columbus. But yeah, we had a great time. We went in that day with Stan. Doug wasn't there, and I worked with a handful of the guitar players, and boy, there were a couple of those guys sounded really good.
Yeah.
The faculty, I can't remember the faculty's names, I'm sorry, but bass player and drummer, killing, really great. So yeah, we had a great time, and Columbus is always great. Cleveland's always killing. So
Excuse me. Yeah, absolutely. Capital's always been strong. Yeah, especially with Stan there.
yeah, Stan's great. He took us out to lunch, and
Oh, cool.
hadn't really hung out with him before, but yeah, he was great and a character, and I really enjoyed talking to him.
That's awesome. Actually, I had a question about because I saw I was reading back up on your website, just your bio and stuff, and I saw that you teach the arranging course. I'm kind of curious about your experience just arranging and composing in general, and I had a more specific question about how being a guitarist kind of affects that world, because I love composing and arranging too, and there's so many things about the guitar that translate well, but there's also aspects of it that I wish I could forget.
Sure, sure, exactly. So I think that I don't know how you feel about this. Like I typically, like if I'm writing for a larger ensemble, like doing big band charts or composing for larger ensembles, I do most of it at the piano.
Okay.
I will. It's interesting because I will maybe compose lines. Like if I'm writing a soli, I'll do that more on the guitar, maybe just because I don't have the facility on the piano.
Right.
But sometimes I feel like it's kind of cool that I have a little bit of a handicap on the piano because I feel like it gets me out of just playing the same and writing the same typical stuff that I would just play on the instrument.
Yeah, exactly.
So piano is big for me, and just kind of like the voicings. I know, like I was way back when checking out like Brian Setzer's big band and reading. I read an article where he talked about. I think he wrote everything on the guitar and like kind of used more of the guitar voicings, which is awesome. And I'll do that occasionally, but I think just the piano has just such a vast range of just clusters and larger voicings, and you can really kind of hear, like if I'm writing for 8 brass, like what that is going to translate to sonically,
Right.
as opposed to guitar where you just kind of have to envision like, okay, here are the bones or here are the saxes and then here's
Right. It's like
something for the trumpets. Yeah. So yeah, more piano. Maybe I compose more on the guitar.
Okay.
Just because I do have more of that facility. But sometimes compose on the piano too. Like if I'm working on a reharmonization or something like that, I feel like the piano gets me more in touch with what I'm hearing as opposed to the guitar where I feel like I'm just kind of jumping back into that bag of stuff that I have on the guitar.
Yeah. That I guess that's good to know because I'm just getting back into piano. It was my first instrument, but I haven't played it like at all for years and years and years. But now, well, I'm supposed to be the TA for the jazz piano class. I'm like, well, I should probably know something.
Right. Sure.
I pulled out a couple books and I've like had so much fun just playing basic 2-5-1s and stuff I haven't done since like school. And it's just, even though it's all this stuff I know really well on guitar, just doing it on a different instrument just makes me hear it differently.
Yeah, it's great, man. And it's piano was my first, like I started playing piano when I was 5. I didn't want to. I was basically like, I came from a family of musicians, so piano was just sort of like thrust upon me
Right.
at a young age. And I'm sure you feel the same way now. I really wish I would have taken it more seriously at the time, and really gotten more into it because I do think that having more stuff down on the instrument would help with arranging and writing. But yeah, the voicing stuff when you're talking about teaching like jazz piano class, I feel like pianists have such a, I guess we do have a system on guitar, but I feel like they have like a hipper system where they're kind of already working on voicings like, kind of more Bill Evans-y kind of left hand, like 7-3-13 kind of sound or the 3-7-9 sound. And they're working through that. Whereas on guitar, I've just been kind of like trying to recently translate that over to the instrument with like more rootless voicings as opposed to just kind of giving them here's the drop 2, here's the drop 3.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just listening to, like, I've been checking out Bill Evans a lot lately, and just the way he voices for himself when he's soloing really works on the guitar. And so I'm sort of trying to push my guys more towards pianistic kind of sounds than sort of like our typical sounds.
Yeah, absolutely. What was your first experiences like composing and arranging?
I think that my first composing, just in general, I was like 8 or 9.
Oh, wow.
And so I figured out, like, as a 9 or 10-year-old that I had these 2 like really terrible cassette players, and I figured out that, like, oh wow, if I record like myself playing on this terrible cassette player, I can hit record on this other one, play that, and then overlay these tracks, and it just kind of kept getting more and more warbly. Yeah. But yeah, I would like I was really into metal and rock, some pop, but more into like Zeppelin and kind of like more of the hard rock, AC/DC and those groups. And so, like, my grandmother had one of those organs that you bought at the mall, and so I'd put like a drum beat on, man, and I would just lay down a track, and I would be composing some kind of tune of some sort and just sort of start messing around with that. And so I used a little bit of my keyboard skills in that aspect, but that was like my first attempts at composing, very young. And really when I got more into composing, I was an undergrad, and at the time it was like 90, 91, so like Steps Ahead was kind of the group du jour, and Brecker and Matheny and Schofield, Mike Stern. So I got into a group with some cats that were probably about 6 or 7 years older than me, in Pittsburgh, and they put together this group that was playing like that kind of stuff, like Rippingtons, more kind of, I don't want to say poppy jazz, but more fusion stuff. So I hadn't written a lot at that point, but I just started writing for that group because we had a lot of gigs, and man, it was awesome because we would rehearse a couple times a week and then have a couple gigs a week, and so I could just write and write and write, and I had this group that would just play all the material. And so I just started writing a lot, and I would get very specific with like piano. Like some of the stuff was just more like lead sheetish, but some of it was more specific piano voicings, trying out like listening to Bob Mintzer and hearing like the bass and the tenor saxophone playing lines together, just experimenting with different colorations that I wasn't necessarily hearing up to that point. But I was like 19 or 20, so I just hadn't heard enough at that point. But that was really the time where I started writing quite a bit, and really I felt like the writing helped my playing to a big extent, because it's like when we're learning guitar, it's like we're shredding, you're getting all this like bag of licks together, and you're this substitution and this and that and the other thing, but your playing kind of ends up sounding like that. And when I started composing and thinking about the arc of a tune, thinking about melodies, like at the time, like the groups like Steps Ahead, even though they were harmonically very advanced, the melodies were pretty motivic, and I don't want to say simple, but they were kind of catchy, accessible. So just kind of thinking about that compositionally, I felt like was very helpful for me as a young guitar player to think more about that, and instead of just how many notes can I fit in, although I still struggle with that too. So
it's always the struggle.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that at like probably 18 or 19, like sophomore year in college, really caught the bug.
That's one of the things that I guess is easy to take for granted if you had that experience early on, just having a group of musicians that you have at your disposal to write for and just kind of shed with and workshop stuff. Because the older you get, unless you really like have the gumption to start your own projects, or you're in a school environment, you don't really have the luxury of even rehearsing, because people are just like, I'm too busy. Like, what is it? Like, oh, you're not paying me. Why would I rehearse? That kind of thing.
Right.
So I'm now really grateful for that. I'm back in school after being gone for 5 years. I'm like, I have a big band I can like write for all the time and just like bring stuff every week. Like, when am I ever gonna get that?
That
definitely.
That is so true. And I'm grateful and fortunate that I had that opportunity. And then I didn't have that opportunity for a long time. And now doing like the military big band gig, I have that sort of again, because I have this group that's being paid to rehearse every day when we don't have gigs, and you can write again. The only problem now is so many cats write now that out of an 18-piece big band, we probably have 10 or 11 folks that are pretty good writers.
Wow.
So as you can imagine, we don't have the time or the gigs to kind of handle folks bringing in charts all the time.
Sure.
But yeah, like you're talking about like school big bands. Really, when we did our doctorates, that's when I started really writing for big band, because Chip McNeil, who ran the program at U of I, super duper into just generating charts from within the ensembles.
Awesome.
So you could write like a new chart every day, and he would play it. He would rehearse that stuff.
Yeah.
It was just great to have that. And like you're talking about, you don't have to pay anybody.
Right, right.
You don't have to deal with people's schedules because you just have a set
Yep.
time. You know, this group's meeting. So that's amazing, man. I would. I'm sure you're writing constantly, but I would say just relish that
Yeah.
nice luxury.
Yeah, that's the goal. Because especially, even like when you're writing, there's so many things you may think are cool, but just maybe you just don't realize, oh, like this type of trumpet voicing doesn't sound good because you can't have three trumpets all in this specific part of the range. Just like really like instrument specific things, like you're just never gonna know until you hear it and put it in front of people, because you can spend all the time on Sibelius in front of the keyboard or whatever, but it's like that in person, feedback.
Right. And it's amazing. Because like I don't know how the student ensembles are, but like the pro cats will be very quick to let you know. You're writing something on finale, and I'm listening to this chart, and I have some kind of bone line, and I'm thinking like, wow, this sounds really cool. And then you bring it in, and they're like, hey, dude, this line, you have me going from like first position to seventh back to third, and I'm initially as a guitar player, I'm like, well, is that hard? Like, maybe do you just need to practice it more? And they're like, no, man, it just doesn't, it's not going to sound like you want it to. So I think that one of the things I've learned, and it was kind of the same back in school, you just learn how to write for the instrument. And you also get a really good sense of writing for the level of the ensemble. So it's wonderful to be able to just write with no limitations and just think, I want to write exactly what I want to write. But it's more challenging when you get a call from somebody that says, hey, I'd love you to write a chart or something for my college band, but it's kind of maybe a more beginning college band. The lead trumpet player can't really play above like a G above the staff too much. And so when you start writing in those constraints, I feel like I almost learn more at that point.
Right.
Learn more about how to write for the ensemble, writing for maybe the players that aren't just like an endless supply of technique and chops.
Yeah, I think restraints or limitations or like a handicap, like you said, when you write at the piano, I think those things can be turned into an opportunity to learn something new or just figure out how to work with what you have, because it's nice to write in an ideal world where everyone's just going to burn whatever chart you have or whatever tune you write, but
sure,
I think it's great to have both sides.
Yeah, it's great. Like I mean, I love Sammy Nestico's writing as much as I love like Maria Schneider's writing. And so it's like I think about Sammy Nestico and that era of writer, and man, their charts basically almost play themselves, where they bring in a chart, it's great, and the band just reads it.
Yep.
Whereas when I first started writing for the larger ensembles, and still to some extent, I'd just be wondering, like, man, why is this taking so long to put together and sound the way I want it to? And I started thinking, like, I'm overwriting. I need to, again, think about the musical arc, think about things that are more easily put together, maybe, because we don't have 3 months to rehearse my really hip blues chart that I just did. So it's like learning that too, like just learning what's playable to some extent, but still being hip.
Sure. You mentioned Maria and Sammy. Are there other like arranger composers that kind of influence you or that you use especially in even your arranging class?
Like I love like all the classics like Brookmeyer, Thad Jones. Maria is killing. Trying to think, Sammy Nestico. All the Claude Thornhills, like that
totally
kind of era of writers.
And Gil was one of his late
Gil Evans. all the stuff with I'm having a senior moment right now with the Ella Fitzgeralds, like Nelson Riddle,
Oh,
all
yeah.
of that
Yep.
stuff. Billy May
Yep.
is another one. And then like the newer writers, like I've been fortunate to play like on some records with Alan Baylock.
Oh, cool.
So I'd kind of put him in there with like the modern writers that I really dig.
'Cause he was working with one of the military bands, right?
Yeah, he was the we started. We were like 2 weeks apart, starting in the Airman or Note, and he was the
Oh, wow.
staff arranger for us. So his like whole gig was at that time to write just for the Airman or Note.
That's wow.
And he's a great writer, and he taught me a lot about writing just from playing his charts, writing stuff that sounded great and sounded hip, but was still accessible to like the heaviest of jazz aficionados down to like folks that were just getting into the genre.
Sure.
And he wrote a lot for the guitar. Mike Crotty was another guy. I don't know if folks would know his name as much, but he was the Airman or Note staff arranger before Alan.
Okay.
And Sammy, actually, that's how he started. He was the Airman or Note arranger,
really?
like in I think the 50s or
Wow.
60s. And so Mike wrote a lot of stuff for guitar. Another writer that folks probably won't know about is when I went to Duquesne, John Wilson, a really great trumpet player, played on some of the early Jimmy Rainey records. Like he played
Oh,
on
wow.
A. He was a great writer, and again, another cat that like I seem to have found my way to like writers that really dig the guitar and really think of the guitar as an equal
Yeah.
player in the ensemble.
Pretty chunking all night.
Yeah, because a lot of writers just, you know,
It's intimidating.
they finish the chart and then they're kind of like, oh crap, I forgot the guitar part, and then they just put like chords or
Yeah. Right.
so being around those guys, like they really thought about where the guitar fit in with the ensemble sonically, and they would write the same thing like with Maria. Like when I listened to Maria Schneider and you had like Ben Monder on, it's
Oh,
like
yeah.
these folks really write for the guitar and write for like, you know, using the effects that are available to us.
Yep.
Thinking about like how much range we have and how we really, like John Wilson really taught me that the guitar was very chameleon. Like it blends equally as well with a flute as it does with a trombone, as
Yep.
it does with the piano, as it does with like a soprano sax. And really, man, I feel like we kind of get blown off in the big band world, but I feel like we're sort of like the most important linchpin.
No,
in modern.
seriously. I was gonna say. I mean, about the blending, like, you know, yeah, you hear guitar with any instrument, and it just fits. It's like this glue. It just makes it work so well.
Yeah.
So, writers
And
out there, use us.
Yeah, no, seriously. And it's great too because I know, like, just educationally speaking, I remember I think I was still in the Airmen, and we would go out and do all these clinics. And I remember high school band director or college band director would be like, "Hey man, my guitar players can't read. Like,
Yep.
what do I do? Like, why can't they read this stuff?" And I would ask the kid, like, "Hey, let me see your book," and it would be like 30 charts of like Freddie Green, which is awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
And then there'd be like one chart that was like a funk chart that had like a sea of 16th notes.
Right.
The kid couldn't do it. So I mean, the other thing about having people writing for the guitar is it really helps to kind of close our gap as readers and ensemble players, to equal that of the horn players, because I do still feel like in a way some of us, or as an instrument, we're still kind of in our infancy in the large ensemble.
Yeah.
So just, you know how it is. It's like, how do I phrase with the trombone and sound like I'm a trombone player? Or how do
Yep.
I phrase with the piano where they're like attacking everything? And so it's cool to have writers and to think about that as a writer too, how it will impact younger guitar players.
Absolutely, that's a great point. And that's what I've been thinking about recently, because like guitar, as ubiquitous as it is, like everyone learns guitar, it doesn't have that same place in the like middle school or high school music areas, because unless you really know how to read and like are really wanting to do it, there's kind of no place for you except for the jazz band. I mean, you don't grow up in orchestra, you don't grow up, in wind symphony or whatever. You don't have this like, you don't even have a section of other people that play your same instrument where you're kind of
Sure.
figuring out phrasing and all whatever it is together. So it's definitely hard as a band director. I've talked to people who are like, how do I get, because they know that there's guitarists at the school. It's like, how do we get them interested in a music that they can't even play?
Right.
Because
Yeah, it is interesting, and I would say by and large, band directors and folks that are running like big bands, like college, high school educators, they're for the most part horn players,
Totally.
brass or woodwind, and so just like I don't know certain aspects of the bone, it's like they really kind of focus on getting the ensemble, like the horns sounding tight, but then the rhythm section sort of doesn't get as involved. Like there's not as much to say to them. So I think it's cool to kind of get a chance. Like I always love going in and working with a big band, just the rhythm section.
Yep.
To kind of teach these guys, because we as guitar players, it's like when I was 13, I wasn't like out buying a Count Basie record. I was out buying like Iron Maiden records and listening to like Jimi Hendrix. So a lot of these kids don't even know who Freddie Green was or what he contributed to the instrument. So I think it's cool to almost like double team these ensembles where you have the person that's kind of rehearsing the more horn stuff, band director, and then come in and kind of work with guitar, piano, bass, and drums, and just how they fit into the whole ensemble.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be a super fun job to just like go to high schools every week and just like work with rhythm sections. That'd be awesome.
Right. But yeah, but man, I still haven't cracked the guitar reading code. Like I still haven't figured out a way to get younger players reading well.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you approach that with your own students in your studio.
Well, one of my questions or thoughts in general is like how, okay, so with jazz education, it's so important to know the history because it's just the building block, it's the foundation, it's the language, it's all of that, it's the style. But I'm also like increasingly curious or like worried about how we keep younger students just interested, because like I think about students that know that they want to go to school for music and jazz is kind of their avenue because classical doesn't make sense for them, but
Right.
but they get to school right away and it's like, here's all this stuff you don't know anything about, like bebop, all this music that you've maybe even never really listened to. Like maybe you've listened to jazz, but maybe not even stuff before whatever year.
Oh yeah.
It's like, it just like, I remember it was just so daunting for me, and obviously I was very self-motivated, but I saw the reason why I was the only guitarist to graduate in 4 years because everyone dropped out. And
Really?
and it's not
Wow.
of the guitar program at least, and I don't think it's on anyone, like it's not Stan's fault or anyone, but it's just
Sure.
like, how do you reconcile like giving students what they need as the foundation, but also kind of like making them excited.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question, and it is challenging because we just don't 95% of guitar players that show up at college, it's like you can either do jazz or classical. So that if they don't want to do classical, it's just jazz. But like you said, they don't even know who Charlie Christian is. Maybe like they just don't know the lineage. And I remember being a senior in high school, and like my father was a great jazz musician, but he was my dad, so to me that was kind of lame because dad's lame, and so I don't listen to that. But in high school, a couple other students like at a local magnet school said, man, you got to check out like Charlie Parker, check out John Coltrane, check out Miles Davis. And at first, like I checked out Bird and Coltrane, and I was like 16 or 17, and I just hate it. I thought, I hate this. Like, what's the deal with it? I don't get it. I'm not really totally digging this. But it was kind of a cool time because like I think getting the students interested. Like we had like Schofield and Stern and Holdsworth and McLaughlin, and all these guys were kind of playing somewhat out of that bebop language, but more of like a rock kind of sound or a rock approach ish. So I was lucky to start hearing like those guys, and I felt like that was a little bit of a bridge to getting back to like the Bird stuff and thinking, oh, okay, now I get what I don't get what he's doing yet, but I get why it's people love this, and I started to really catch that bug. And I think it was because we had that kind of really obvious bridge in the 80s and early 90s of guitar players that were playing with like overdrive, wah-wah. Stern was like using octave stuff and delay and bending. And like hearing like stuff like We Want Miles with Mike Stern, it's like it's heavy metal but with all the Bird language.
Yeah, total. Yeah.
You know, so I've been kind of just trying to maybe, and I really should do this more now that you brought it up, like exposing my students to that stuff. Because a lot of the cats, I'm trying to think of the cats now. So if I play like Adam Rogers is one of my favorite like modern guitar players. Like I love his sound, like all his straight ahead quartet stuff. But if I play Adam for like an 18-year-old freshman, I feel like it has that same effect where they just don't know, you know, what is this guy doing? There's a little bit of a disconnect where if I play them like Stern from like Time and Place or any of the Brecker stuff, they're immediately like, wow, this is awesome.
Absolutely.
And then Adam kind of becomes like, oh wow, this guy's killing too, because I start to see the lineage. And Adam's maybe not even a good example because he does all he is using all the same rock stuff as well.
Sure.
But maybe like the Joe Passes or like the guys that aren't familiar with that stuff, it gets a little bit lost on them until they have some kind of bridge from what they've checked out.
Yeah, exactly.
To those guys. And sometimes students, I've had students over the years that after a couple of years, they just come to terms with, I just don't like jazz.
Yeah.
And so they maybe move into a different major or switch or figure something out. So some students just never come around to it. But then some students like catch the bug and they devour stuff, and then they start telling me about players that I haven't checked out. And they get like super, super duper into it. And that's exciting. And even the players that don't ever get around to that or don't catch the bug, it's still great to work with them, because then it pushes me as an educator to kind of inspire them so that they don't stop playing.
Absolutely.
Choose a different career, you know?
Yeah, I think for any musician that wants to, really play professionally in any scene, and they're interested in like the academic thing, they should get a jazz degree, because they're gonna get the most tools and the most resources and just the most knowledge to take into any other field. You don't have to play a straight ahead gig in your life, but if you have those tools, you can translate it to anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And if Adam watches this, like, I love Adam's playing, and I didn't mean to say that the kids don't dig it. It's just, I was trying to think of an example of like clean jazz guitar that's complex.
Oh yeah, no, I know what you mean. But I think that's the right approach, like starting with something that they can relate to, because like 99% of the time, any guitarist coming into a collegiate program is going to come from some sort of rock or funk or pop, whatever background. Like, I don't. How many guitarists have you seen that have come into your program that have been like directly from like a classical or like jazz, like all that standpoint? That's really rare.
It's pretty rare, and it's very rare. I have a student now, a kid, Grayson Boatwright, that already came in. He transferred from he went to Utah where Corey Christensen teaches. And so he was already like in high school super into like all the old school cats. So he kind of came like pre formed to be into it. So then I feel like now I just need to expose him or steer him towards maybe players that he hasn't checked out.
Sure.
And I have another kid, Alan Fogelson. Some of these kids are like, it's unbelievable how talented they are and how quickly they pick things up. But he came in with not as much jazz background, but plays cello and has like just super technique on the instrument and great ears. So it's like with him, I just had to kind of say like, hey, transcribe like this solo and this solo and this solo. And he just caught the bug and just is super into it now. And again, like these are students that are kind of checking out players, and they'll text me every once in a while like, hey, have you checked this out? Check this guy out. I just heard this. So that's really enjoyable for me as an educator when they're that into it.
Absolutely. I know you're enjoying this conversation. I just want to take a brief pause and give you a little example of Shawn's playing. This is a tune off his last record, Symmetricity. It's an original entitled Swirl, and I know you're going to dig it. I also wanted to ask about, what was your first experiences teaching, and then also, like your experiences teaching at the university level for the first time, and how just how you kind of have learned to deal with that situation, because I meant that sounded like in a bad way, but obviously the collegiate environment is so different. There's so much more responsibility, and you kind of have to. I also kind of wonder how you like plan, like do you kind of give the same things to all the students, or is it all kind of different each year? Or?
Yeah, that's a great question. I probably had the same experience that everybody does when they start teaching. You're teaching like maybe to a music store, or teaching kids like, here's this AC/DC tune, or here's this Avenged Sevenfold tune, or whatever. Right. So you kind of do that. And yeah, I'd say the biggest difference for me at the university level, or one of the biggest differences, is you kind of have like this end point. So it's like you have a starting point in the fall semester, and then you know that there's a jury, and then you know that the end of the freshman year, sophomore year, and then they're going to have recitals, they're going to have barrier juries, junior, senior recitals. So there's kind of like these sort of goalposts or posts that you're sort of working towards. Whereas teaching the other stuff, like students at stores and just private lessons, it's, I'm not saying it's not as rewarding, but it tends to kind of just sort of be this sort of like you're with the tide of the ocean, and you just sort of go where the tide takes you.
At times.
Yeah. And you can't, you have like certain things that I know, like a college student comes to me and is going to be a jazz guitar player or a commercial guitar player. We know that there are certain things that they just have to know. Mm-hmm. Like you have to know your scales to some extent, you have to know your chords to some extent, you have to know how to like play through tunes, you have to know language, listening, you have to know the tune. Like there's more specific materials that I know they have to be able to do. Like you have to have good chops. You have to read to some extent. So I guess the biggest, change or kind of like being in that environment is kind of a little bit of a weighty feeling of, oh man, I got to make sure that I get this person from point A to pro. pro player because
Yeah.
once they graduate, they the biggest thing I tell my students is when they're in college, everybody's kind of not really competing with each other, but there's a certain like, okay, they know where they kind of fit in level wise.
Yeah.
They have the upperclassmen that they look up to. They have the folks that are like more beginning that are behind them. But I'm like, man, the day you graduate, you're kind of competing now with the whole world.
Everyone. Yeah. It's good.
So,
Great point.
like, when you're checking out Julian Lage as a college student, you're thinking of him as like this non-attainable entity. But once you graduate, it's like that's who
You're in the same
that's your
space.
yeah. He's your peer now.
Yeah.
To some extent. So I think it's I don't want to say it's stressful, but I feel like I try to take that responsibility of like I have to give these folks a certain amount of tools that they have to be able to do by the time they get out of here, and then within that, it's hard to not give everybody the same thing, especially when you start to get like 10, 12, 14 students.
Absolutely.
It becomes more challenging to cater every single hour to each student. But I try to do that to some extent. I try not to, if some kid's playing at a super, super duper high level, I try not to just say, well, no, this semester we're supposed to work on our drop two voicings,
Right.
which you already can do, but this is just this is my plan.
Right.
So, just playing with the guys and I think really the biggest way for them to learn and for me to learn how to help them is to play with them and just determine where are you at? What are the things that maybe I'm hearing too much of? What are the things that I'm not hearing? Are you what's your level of interaction?
Yep.
Are you, like a lot of students have the tools, but when they play, it just kind of sounds like they're using these tools
Sure.
in
Yeah.
a certain way. So I'm thinking like, okay, now with this guy, if he knows has a certain bag of materials together, now we have to talk about putting that stuff together in a musical way so that you don't just sound like you're playing this bag of material. So I don't even know if that makes sense, but trying to gear all of the tools that they need to the different players and trying to get it to them at the right time or at a time like I feel like they're ready for that material. And then you got the students that some students, you tell them to transcribe a solo, they come back a week later and they memorize the solo and can play it.
Yep.
And then sometimes you have the students that you give them a solo to transcribe and 12 weeks later you're sort of saying like, hey,
Where's that solo?
are we going to ever get to that solo? Are we going to finish that solo? So I've learned over the years that I can't have a specific agenda because every student's different and they all learn at different paces and all are different levels. So I just kind of try to have this overarching bag of stuff. And so I drop a lot of stuff onto a OneDrive for them and they can peruse at their leisure, like whatever they want to. And then hopefully that might generate questions. That's the other thing, like my best students and my students that I enjoy the most are the ones that come with a curiosity and with questions, and not just questions like what strings do you use or how high is your action, but the students that will come to you, and I'm sure you have these students where they're checking out like Adam Rogers and there's some lick that they're like, wow, what is he doing there? So kind of sort of illuminating stuff that they dig really is sort of those are the best moments, I think, for both myself as a teacher and for them as a student.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel the same way. So along with education, another thought or question I had was, you've spent so much time in like kind of all the facets that a professional guitarist can live in. Like you're in a full-time performing ensemble with the military band. You're also an educator, and you've also been like a sideman and done, various other types of gigging and band leading as well. I'm curious what you tell your students nowadays, or what you think is kind of the most viable path for them. I know everyone is different, obviously, but do you recommend grad school for people? Do you recommend they just kind of, gig for a couple years and figure it out? I mean, what do you tell your kind of upperclassmen students these days?
Usually, like if a student's getting ready to graduate and they start talking about graduate school, my first response is to wait for a year or 2 or 3, or just wait. Yeah. Like I feel like we all do undergrad because everyone does undergrad. So you go to school because all your friends go to school, and you just go to school. When you start going to graduate school, and I'm sure you feel like this, what is the reason that you're going to graduate school? Is it to get something that you missed from your undergrad? Is it a certain teacher that's at that school that you're just have always wanted to study with? By and large, and I won't lump all of my students into this situation or this thought process, but it tends to be a stopgap of I'm afraid to get out there into life. And so I'm finished with my undergrad, so bam, I'm going to go and do my master's degree.
Yeah.
But wait, that's only 2 years. I'm only 23 or 24. I still don't want to join the world. So now maybe I'll do my doctorate.
Right.
And stay straight through school. So I didn't do my master's till I was, started my master's, I think I was 32 or 33.
Oh,
it was after I did the airman gig.
Okay.
And then I finished my master's, I think I was like 34-ish, like mid-30s. And then I didn't do the doctorate. It took a couple years to do the doctorate. And really the only reason I did the doctorate was because my wife, Darden, wanted to do her master's in jazz voice. And at the time we were living in Nashville, there were no programs that appealed to her. There just weren't any programs for jazz voice. So we ended up, she ended up auditioning and getting in at the University of Illinois, and then she got a fellowship, and I was still like hesitant. So I was going to stay in Nashville, and she was just going to go to Illinois for like the school year.
Sure.
And we were going to keep our place in Nashville, and the Chip McNeil, the guy that ran the program, was like, "Hey man, you should do your doctorate. You want to teach college? Like that's going to really look good for you." And I was still sort of like, no, like no more school.
Right.
But finally I decided to do it, but I feel like we had a reason. Like we were starting to want to teach more at the university level. Realized the other thing with U of I is they had a really great faculty. So I was like, man, like it would be great again to just become a student for a couple years. And it was amazing. Like I miss that 3 or 4 years of just focusing on playing. But so I tell my students to think about why you're going to grad school. And if grad school is to just hold you off from just getting out into the scene, that's really just the worst.
Yep.
You're just not going to get anything from it. And I think that the older we get, I don't know how you were as an undergrad, but like I was not a great student as an undergrad. But then when I got older and went to grad school, like I took it more seriously. I got more from it. I knew kind of how to get more from it.
Right.
So I steer them clear. If they're just like adamant about like I want to do a master's degree, I would then steer them clear of staying at George Mason and studying with me. I would say
you have a master's program?
We have a doctorate as well.
Really? In jazz?
So it's not, the doctorate's like just a performance doctorate.
Okay.
But you do like a jazz emphasis where all of your courses are jazz.
Oh, wow.
But the actual piece of paper you get doesn't say
sure
doctorate in jazz. But the master's is jazz specific. And then the doctorate, I think we've had 6 or 7 folks get through the doctoral program, and some like really great players, mostly older students.
Sure.
That were professional players. So Yeah, I definitely like if someone's going for like a master's though, like one of my guys, I'm thinking, man, who would I love to study with? And I'm
Totally.
thinking like I'd love to study with like Mike Marino or
Totally.
whoever. And so I'll
Yeah.
tell them like, hey man, check out like this school, Temple, this
Temple,
school.
yeah.
Like you should go and study with these masters. Like you've been with me for 4 years. I don't want to say I'm out of stuff to work with you on, but you really should get out and get a different perspective if you're going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like we kind of steer them away from it initially.
What was your doctorate in?
I can't remember if it's called jazz studies or jazz performance, but it's
Okay, so they so
jazz
it was
doctorate.
jazz. Okay,
Yeah, it
gotcha.
was very specific jazz, and then I think my minor was in ethnomusicology.
Oh wow.
You had
Okay,
to do a minor as a doctoral student at U of
gotcha.
I.
Gotcha. Is that something I'm seeing more and more as soon as I got to grad school, everyone's already talking about getting their doctorate. I'm like, what? Why? Like
Yeah,
maybe not the jazz, well, the jazz cats too, but especially all the other cats. And I'm like, the head of the program, like one of the first days, he was like, yeah, I think I might be in like the last generation of like, head of jazz studies where I don't have a doctorate and like I don't really need one. But he was like, it's
sure.
getting tougher and tougher for younger cats that want to enter that world, and you just need as much paper as possible.
Yeah, it's like I'm sort of on the fence and torn with it all. The I do think that one of the biggest things I learned doing my doctorate, aside from like it was a great musical experience, but I
Mhm.
just learned how to live within the academic system in the community, how things worked, how to navigate that. And it's kind of similar to like my military gig, where you kind of have to get into the military band to know how to navigate
Right.
the military band world. So I think that part of part of why these schools now, especially smaller schools, will look for that paper is because they want someone that they don't have to train, I guess, on how to be in the like what's a jury? How do I sit on a doctoral panel? How do
Yeah.
when someone needs letters of recommendations, what's that? What's a teaching philosophy? What's
Sure.
all of this
That's a
different
good point. Yeah.
stuff that they kind of want nowadays. And then my other thought is that the reason that so many people are getting advanced degrees is because we just don't. Like I remember talking to my dad at one point, and he toured with Maynard Ferguson for 4 years in the
Wow.
70s. And so when he left Maynard's gig, he came back to Pittsburgh and he said, I had a contract at a club. I played 5 nights a week at this club, and it was for a year, and I could sub out like a certain percentage, but 5 nights a week it was like my trio, my quartet. Nowadays, it's like that same club. Before COVID, maybe you could get a gig there once every couple months.
Yeah.
The pays, the monetary rewards are similar to less, and so I just don't think. I don't think. I don't want to say that there aren't as many opportunities, because I do think that there are a lot of opportunities. There's just not as much of like the mentorship of like the groups like the Blakeys,
Totally.
Miles Davises, where kids get into a group with an older master,
Yep.
learn the ropes that way.
Yeah. Playing night after night.
Yeah, playing 6, 7 nights a week, playing even more than that,
Yeah.
tunes and all this stuff. So I think that, and I read online, social media, like, you get the folks that are like so anti music school for jazz. And I do get that to a certain extent, but I think that at least my philosophy, and hopefully the good educators' philosophy, is we're sort of trying to replicate that mentor apprentice kind of
Yeah.
relationship, even though it's a little bit more artificial. It's a different environment, but you know, it can kind of yield some or most of the same rewards if the teacher's good. If you got a teacher that's just like, here's this book and we're going to work out of this book, and if you ask me any other questions, I'm just going to like steer you back to this book. That's not cool. But I think that you get around your students and you like expose them to transcribe this, check this out. If you check this out, let's talk about like
Right.
what Joe Pass is doing on these Ella things. Like, let's do that. Let's play this duo. Like, why do your voicings not sound good? Like, do this. Like, you can simulate that environment, I guess. And I think that that's why there's so many folks just staying in school, because it's like you can play, like you're doing your masters now, you can write for this big band. As soon as you get done with your masters, there's sort of like no more big band.
Yep, totally.
So then you might think like, well, I could do a doctorate. I'll have 4 more years of like a really great ensembles that I can write for.
Totally.
So I think that those are kind of the reasons, or part of the reason.
And I was just reminded of, like, yes, school is definitely can be artificial as far as the mentor, faculty relationship, but I've been lucky enough, like the outside experiences I've had with like my capital faculty, like, I mean, I've had many nights where I've hung out to like 3 a.m. after hours at like the jazz club, just like hanging out with my professors or playing with them. After a certain point, they would hire me and then we would just hang all night. And that's where sometimes I'd learn even more from someone, just asking stuff.
We try to create, like Darden and I, there's a really great restaurant that's near the campus, this place called the Epicure Cafe. And actually the owners...
I played there once.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So the owner's son is one of my students at Mason.
Cool.
So Darden's, like, one of the things that we loved at U of I was that there was a club that was right off of campus that had jazz 7 nights a week. And like the student groups. Yeah, the Iron Post, yep.
I've heard of it.
Okay. Worth at the Iron Post. Yeah. So there was certain nights were like a U of I night, but then other nights were just like the local players or whatever. So there was always something happening, and the kids could all go hang, and the faculty would be there and playing and hanging. And so we're trying to kind of, not now, but we were creating that kind of environment at the Epicure where we were trying to have like jazz guitar nights, jazz vocal nights. This semester we're talking about doing like an Ella Joe Pass sort of thing where we pair all of the guitar players with a vocalist, and they're going to like do some of the repertoire from all those great records. And then, health willing, if we can kind of get out a little bit more, have these nights where folks can play, we try to. I know it's difficult for students because like where we are in DC, it's so spread out that if I'm playing a gig 30 miles from campus, it's a challenge for the students to like get in the car and drive to like a different part of DC. But we do try to encourage that. I'll try to occasionally, as much as possible, like when Peter Bernstein came to town with Larry Goldings, like I tried to get as many of my guitar guys, and we just kind of went out and hung.
Yeah.
And just hang, and the school building definitely makes it a little bit more artificial. But even when we're hanging at school, like I try to be as much like, hey, we're just hanging.
Totally.
It's not a club, but it might as well be a club. And we might as well just hang and talk about stuff and just sort of rap about it. So we do our best to make it not just like this classroom thing.
Just look at the syllabus. All the answers are there.
Yeah. What tunes do I need to know? Well, look at that list over there. Like,
right.
But so there's a little bit of that. But I think we're still... Like, I'm still old enough to remember that going out in Pittsburgh and going to jam sessions and checking out all the local players and checking out the big name players when they would come into like some of the bigger clubs. And so we still try to encourage that.
Absolutely, man. Well, I know your students are very lucky to have you. You're an amazing player and educator.
Oh, thanks, Zach.
You do everything so well, man. Seriously.
Oh, I appreciate it.
course. I think I don't want to take too much of your time, but one of my last questions or thoughts was just what it's like being in the military band experience, especially where, like you mentioned, you rehearse like every day or often, even when you might not have gigs. It's so rare to be in a full time professional ensemble that's just rehearsing all the time. I just wonder what that experience is like.
It's cool. Like well, first of all, I'd say that I'm like uber grateful to have the gig,
Totally.
because I know that like especially right now, so many cats are struggling, and it's like the whole landscape of the industry has just changed in the last 9 months.
Yep. Yep.
That I'm grateful for that position or that job, but I think it can be challenging because I think at the Commodores we do like 80 to 90 gigs a year
Okay.
as the full band.
Hmm.
That includes like a 3 week tour in one of the regions of the United States. Then I do like probably another 15 or 20, 25 like solo slash small group kind of events, I guess, whether they're
Through the
background
military.
music. Yeah, through the military. And then if we're not playing gigs, like we're usually the busiest in the summer and the fall. In the kind of like the winter, kind of early spring, we're rehearsing like 4 days a week usually.
Okay.
And then if we have gigs, then we don't rehearse as much. But it can be like, I think the challenge with rehearsing a lot and doing these gigs with the same group and the same folks is just kind of maintaining an edge.
Totally.
So like when I was in the Airmen of Note for the first 8 years, you have this full-time gig and you have this salary and you have these benefits, and if it can be really easy to become complacent,
Sure. Absolutely.
because if your playing slips a little bit, nothing's really going to happen. And if you just keep getting better and better and better, the gig's still the gig. So
Right.
when we left the Air Force and we're in Nashville and then went to Illinois, it's like if you're not playing at a high level all the time, you're not getting called to play.
Totally. Yeah.
Or cats hear you and they're kind of like, I wasn't. It seemed a little like Shawn's like not on his game, or something's not right. So there's like this great energy and edge to just being a full-time freelance musician, where you know that no matter what gig you do, you gotta play
Right.
at the top level, because
Resets every time.
yeah, it resets every
Well,
time.
2 gigs ago, I sounded really good, so don't worry. I'm.
Yeah, like I played a great solo on that tune the other night, so like I'm good for like a couple more months.
Right. Right.
Like if I stand up on the Navy gig and play like a terrible solo, it's not like tomorrow they're going to say like, "Hey man, we can't use you anymore." Like
Yeah,
I'm in the gig.
Yeah.
So I would say that the inner fire or inner motivation is the most challenging part of the gig.
Yeah. Because the onus is most certainly on the individual.
Yeah, because it's like, you know how it is. Like we rehearse a lot. I mean, we rehearse more than probably any civilian group, even like the biggest
Yeah.
names. Like they just don't rehearse that. Like they don't rehearse 4 or 5 days a week. So there can be like, it's challenging to like on a Monday morning to sort of just phone it in, or just think like, I just don't, I'm just not really like into it right now.
Yeah.
And so kind of staying on top of that is the most challenging thing, in progressing, like just getting better and better and better and transcribing and still like learning tunes and stuff like that, because it doesn't necessarily help you on that gig specifically.
Sure.
The great part, that's the challenging part. The great part is that you're playing you're forced to play all the time. So there's never like a point where I could just get disgusted and just not touch my instrument for
Yeah.
a week or
Have
two.
you?
Yeah, I have to. And so it kind of helps push me in a way because it's like we'll rehearse at like 11 a.m. I might show up at the building at like 9:30 and just go up into one of like the Wenger practice rooms and just shed for like an hour to just get warmed up and get everything flowing. So I think that it kind of forces you to keep your chops up, but in another way, if you really want to like progress, that's the challenge of it.
Yep.
But there's like always upside and downside. The upside is that you play with these players all the time, so there definitely does become like each person's playing. So like if I'm comping for person X, I become really intimate with person X's playing, and I feel like I can really help propel them or do stuff that's making them sound their best. Whereas if I'm playing with different folks all the time, there's a level of not
Uncertainty, yeah.
knowing. There's a level of uncertainty, and that's great. But then the downside is that people play with each other for 10 or 15 years. You start to learn folks' weaknesses or what they do best. Yeah, what they do best, or maybe what they don't do the best.
Yeah.
And so that's the other challenge for me is like I don't want to be the weak link. I don't want to be that guy that they say, oh, we can't do this chart because Shawn can't like navigate these changes, or it's too fast, or it's too angular. So kind of keeping the level super high so that no matter what gets put in front of you, you sound, as good as you sound on that, like at your peak level.
Yeah.
And that's easier to maintain as a freelancer. That's part of the thing that I miss about being at U of I and just being out in the world is, man, there's just this kind of, I don't know, this energy about just every time you played, like never like kind of giving up or letting up at all, because you just never knew what was going to happen or who was going to hear you or what was going to come from it. And that's great. But then also having the full-time thing is great. It's just challenging to simulate. It's again, like you have to simulate artificial, like desire to like, yeah, man, I really want to like keep improving.
Yeah, absolutely. That could be a tough spot. Though I'm certainly envious of at least the level of stability you would have with that. Because I mean, honestly, my reason for going to grad school is because I want to be in a better position to teach at a university where
Yep.
I can have maybe beyond an adjunct thing, which is just not possible without a master's, certainly.
Sure.
Yeah, just for me, I'm not sure it's viable to play full time anymore. It's not something I mean, obviously I want to play a lot, but I don't know if I want to play like 200 dates a year just because I literally have to, because that's what it was coming down to. So it's always that balance, but I'm eager to get into the teaching realm and kind of have that.
Yeah, man.
I love it. I love it.
You're going to do it. It's just a matter of time of when you're going to get like an adjunct gig and a full-time gig, and then you're going to end up being like, a educator all-star, like really great gig. No, seriously, because it's like you're such a great player, and you're like super like ridiculously studied, like where you're like my students are starting to watch all your like chord voicing videos and stuff like that. And they're like showing me stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah, I know Zach. They're like, hey, I found this guy Zach Jones. Like, I'm like, yeah, man,
that's crazy.
So
funny.
You're gonna do that. That the other thing I would say is that the teaching gig and the military gig have similarities where if you get a full-time teaching gig, again, it can be challenging to like maintain
absolutely
your own progression and level, because you're helping others so much. You sort of get lost. You can get lost a little bit in like getting them to be great players and then forget about yourself for a little bit.
Absolutely.
But yeah, the stability is great. Like I'm fortunate to have the adjunct thing and the military thing. The teaching thing, I would never say like what I prefer. I think the teaching thing is really great because you can do. It's kind of like the world is your oyster a little bit,
Yeah.
where you can kind of take it as far as you want to, start as many different groups as you want to. Whereas my military gig is just, I'm not going to really change or add anything to that.
Yeah.
Like I do the
Got one
gig.
function. Yeah.
But the teaching thing is awesome because it's like you can really like within that system start almost anything and create almost anything and affect students' lives as much as you want to. Like you can be as involved with their progression both personally and musically as much as you want to. But the stability is definitely nice. The teaching, like the recruiting, like I sometimes feel like we're sort of like football coaches where they've got like their junior and senior quarterback is the superstar, but they're going to be graduating. So then they're recruiting like, where's my next superstar quarterback coming from?
Totally.
I just had this conversation with Darden the other night. I sat down and thought like, oh crap, I'm losing like 5 people after next year. And they're some of my best people.
Yep.
I'm like, uh-oh, like I got to start kind of recruiting and getting my next
Yeah. Right.
group of guys in here. So that's probably one of the more challenging things is just recruiting.
Yeah. What does that space look like? I mean, is it as specific as, do you know, like you get specific scholarship money? Like, hey, Shawn, you can have access to this amount of money that you can throw at a student that you really want. I mean, do you get that kind of?
I know, like I know we have money, and so it's like each year it just kind of depends on if we get like some like ridiculously talented student that comes in, I can push for that person to get like a certain scholarship or advocate for that person. But you just never know because some years we'll have a really great large group of incoming students, so then it becomes harder. And then some years, if you have a few less students coming in, it's a little bit easier to give more money to that
Right.
kind of like star people. But yeah, it's sort of like a voodoo and witchcraft where you just don't know where these students are going to come from. And sometimes you can get a student like the highest scholarship that the school offers, and then they just determine that they want to go somewhere else. Like, it's kind of like this sort of chess game a lot. But the recruiting thing is like, for me, is just almost the most important part of the gig. Just because the studio can go from 12 people to 4 people pretty fast.
Yeah, seriously.
Or 4 to 12 pretty fast. And then trying to increase the level of the studio, like, so that, when I first started teaching, the studio were more beginners, but now I feel like I have like a handful of like really talented, accomplished players, and then I have some of the more beginners that are moving towards that. And so the level's increasing. And then when the level increases in the older students, it increases in the younger students because they see these other students,
Totally.
Kicking butt.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
Yeah. But yeah, man, you're whatever school hires you whenever is going to be super, super lucky to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, man. Well, I don't want to take up more of your time. Thank you so much for doing this. It's super awesome talking to you. It's always a blast.
Thanks, you too, Zach, man. Always great.
Do you have anything to promote? Any new music, records?
No new records of my own, but I just recorded, I think it's coming out on Origin Records in March. Really great trombone player in DC, Ben Patterson, just did a quintet record, that I'm really proud of. It's all his original music, and I think that's coming out in March. It's called Push the Limits.
Sweet.
I'm back promoting, like we just did a performance that was aired at the Gen conference on Thursday. So if you missed that, that's on YouTube under the Shawn Purcell group.
Love to watch that for sure.
And so that's some original stuff. Darden and I are planning on doing a we haven't set when we're going to record, but sometime in the summer, we're wanting to kind of do like an old throwback, like the Cannonball, Nancy Wilson record, George Shearing, Nancy Wilson, where we kind of do like a half instrumental, half
Gotcha.
vocal record. So we're going to be doing that this year. But Ben's is the most impending, like the one that's coming out the quickest.
Sweet, man. I'll definitely look up your Gen performance. I saw it was happening, but I didn't catch it live.
Yeah. We recorded it like in December, and it turned out well, man. It's hard to replicate a live performance when you're playing in a big hall that has 0 people.
Yeah, exactly.
And the sound's kind of not really you're not getting that same like live
feedback. Yeah,
but I feel like I'm pretty proud of the performance, and I think we got pretty close to like people really seeing like a live show. But yeah, Symmetricity is the one. That's my big plug.
Oh, it's so killing. I was listening to it I drove up from Columbus today, and I listened to it on the way again.
Oh, thanks, Zach. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thanks.
And I read that Benedetto article. Really cool, man. And that guitar is killing.
Oh yeah, let me
show me first. Yeah, let's see that.
Shameless.
Do it.
Plug. So yeah, I just got this. I don't know. Like right before Thanksgiving, I guess. And I played this. It's the Pat Martino model.
Yeah.
And I met them at the Gen booth last year.
Okay.
And a really good friend of mine that I replaced in the Airman Note, Wayne Wilkinson's a Benedetto artist. And he's like, man, you should come down to the booth and hang with Howard and Jackson Evans and all the guys. And I played the Pat Martino, and I was just like, I don't need another guitar, but man, this guitar is like so amazing. Like it was just one of the most comfortable guitars I ever played. And so Wayne helped me, and I worked with Howard and got like an artist deal with them. And so I ordered the guitar custom. I just got it right before Thanksgiving. It was like a week before we did the Gen video.
Oh, wow.
So the Gen video, like I feel like I'm watching myself, and I can just tell like I just got this guitar, so I'm like not completely used to it, but it's such a great axe, man. And the article that Bob and Cindy Benedetto just put out, they were so awesome, and you know, Cindy was just so great, and I was just floored that they even to just be a part of that is amazing. But yeah, the guitar is amazing. It doesn't have like the Pat Martino like tree trunk strings on it. It's got more manageable strings. That was a big one. But yeah, it's great, and they've been super great, and I'm thrilled, you know, to represent them as much as I can.
Awesome, Shawn. Dr. Shawn.
Yeah, man. Thanks, Zach.
We'll talk soon, man.
Yeah, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Later.
Yeah, see ya.
There we have it. Another fantastic conversation with a guitar wizard, consummate educator, and just an all-around awesome guy, Dr. Shawn Purcell. Thank you, listener, for checking this out, and I really hope you liked this episode, and if you did, please share it, rate it, like it, subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcast, and tell a friend. It would really mean a lot to me. You can email me at beyondthefretspodcast@gmail.com, or just reach out on Instagram at beyondthefrets, or go to the website beyondthefrets.com. I hope to see you very soon. There will be more episodes coming out more regularly in the summer, hopefully sticking to the bi-monthly schedule that I originally intended to, which I have not stuck to at all, but you know, that's how it goes. My next amazing episode will actually be a two-parter, and that will be with Mr. Jake Essner, who is a guitar educator in Boston. And if you don't know him, check him out on Instagram. He is just an unbelievable deep thinker and kind of a new force of guitar education in general. He has some really interesting ideas and concepts as far as technique and harmony and rhythm, and he just goes super, super deep. And he's a really interesting cat because he doesn't perform, actually. He is primarily an educator, which I think is really interesting. We got into some really amazing territories, and we took our time on that. So it's going to be a two-parter, which I think will be released as 2 separate episodes, 1 week after another. So that'll be a lot of content for you to dig into. But until then, I will see you next time.